Legal just needs a quick signature, said the HR rep, the one with the personality of a parking ticket and a smile that always meant someone else's funeral. I was mid-coffee, elbow deep in debugging a latency regression when she slithered into my cube and dropped the packet on my keyboard like a summons. Nothing urgent, she said. Just IP consolidation for the acquisition. Standard stuff. That was the moment I knew they were about to screw me. I flipped through the paperwork slowly, letting the silence thicken. They always think the quiet ones are slow. The title page alone told me everything I needed. Intellectual property transfer agreement. Voluntary waiver of claim. Buried under legal fluff was one simple ask. Sign away the algorithm I'd built from scratch. 12 years of iterative optimization, cross-platform calibration, and neural route prediction. All of it wrapped into a fuel-saving logistics engine they barely understood, but marketed like it was the second coming of Christ. You want me to walk you through how it works first? I asked casual, like I wasn't already reading their eulogy in my head. The HR rep laughed, a brittle titter that echoed too loud. Oh no, we've got people for that now. Real was kids. You know how it is. Yeah, I knew. They brought in a new CTO last month, Riley something. Fresh out of Stanford, all flash and acronyms, never met a buzzword he didn't want to wear as a cape. First week on the job, he asked me if we had a digital twin strategy. I told him we had something better. Real data. He blinked like I'd insulted his mother. From that day forward, I was a ghost at my own workstation. The algorithm, my algorithm, was never meant to be flashy. It didn't pitch itself with fireworks or show off in board meetings. But it worked. Damn well. It rerouted thousands of delivery trucks in real time, adjusting for road closures, weather events, fuel consumption patterns, and driver behavior. It saved the company $4.8 million last quarter alone. Confirmed by finance, begrudgingly credited in a footnote Riley tried to cut. But to them, I was a relic. A middle-aged back-end engineer with no TikTok account, and a stubborn insistence on handwritten notes. A fossil. Never mind that every update, every line of code since version 0.1 lived in my head, because no one else bothered to understand the actual logic tree that made it tick. They just wanted the output. The candy. Not the recipe. So when HR slid that paper over like it was a goddamn Olive Garden receipt, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't object. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee, let the bitterness sit on my tongue, and said, noted. That night, I went home, pulled up the license server from my private repo, and stared at the old switch I'd written 10 years ago. It wasn't elegant, just a buried dependency that pinged a silent key validator once every 72 hours. Fail the check? System deactivates. Graceful, invisible, irreversible. I'd coded it in after the second CTO tried to cut corners by shipping an early version to a client without proper testing. I told myself it was for security, a failsafe. I never thought I'd use it. Until now. They thought I was just going to roll over. That I'd sign away my life's work with a digital pen and a thank you email. That I'd disappear into the Ohio mist like some polite dinosaur, extinct and grateful. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just smiled, copied the form to a folder titled Gravestone, and began reviewing the dependencies. Line by line. Call by call, making sure that when the time came, it would fire without hesitation. Let them rehearse their demo. Let the champagne chill. Let the suits prepare their statements about seamless transitions and legacy technology. They didn't know it yet, but the legacy wasn't in the tech. It was in me, and they just declared war on it with a form letter and a chuckle. The new CTO showed up like a TED Talk in human form, skinny suit, no socks, hair so perfectly tousled it probably had its own PR team. First thing out of his mouth wasn't hello. It was, let's talk disruption. Not a question. A declaration. Like he was Moses and his MacBook was the tablet. Name was Riley. Couldn't have been older than 30. Sharp jawline, louder voice. Said he came from a culture of acceleration. I'd read his LinkedIn the night before. 2 years at a failed SaaS, 1 overpriced acquisition, and 6 months consulting for a logistics startup that imploded mid-Series B. They called him a visionary. I called him a toddler with a flamethrower. His first week, he asked the team what our AI posture was. I said we had models, not postures. He blinked, joked that I must be vintage code, chuckled like we were buddies. From that moment on, I wasn't invited to any strategy meetings. Didn't matter that the algorithm was still mine, that it ran nightly batch jobs no one else could trace, that half the dependencies were hand-stitched Python wrappers around legacy C modules, built before Riley learned to shave. He didn't want to know how it worked. He just wanted it to work, preferably with his face in the press release. By the second week, the Slack channels were scrubbed of my name. Legacy dev handoff in progress, one note read. The intern assigned to document my logic asked if the green code meant it was encrypted. I told her it meant I hadn't commented it yet. The demo date got announced during an all-hands I wasn't even invited to. A Friday morning showcase. Public-facing. High stakes. Investors flying in. Journalists pre-briefed. Riley stood in front of the touchscreen like a damn game show host, pointing at dashboards that sparkled because I wrote the damn animation logic 2 years ago, back when leadership still spoke in full sentences. After next quarter, he said, all teeth and startup sweat will be fully transitioned. Automated. We won't need any manual inputs or legacy oversight. Someone asked if legacy oversight meant me. He laughed. Let's just say once we launch, we won't need him at all. No one corrected him. No one flinched. Not even the VP of engineering, who knew damn well that every night at 3:12 a.m., my script pinged 3 weather APIs, recalibrated 2 million dynamic waypoints, and pushed an optimized route map that saved the company more than any marketing stunt ever had. But facts don't matter when buzzwords are airborne. So I watched. I listened. I didn't say a damn thing. I took notes in a notebook no one ever asked about. I tracked every change they made to the test servers. Every time they pulled a build, every time they ran simulations. I saw the flaws before they did. I watched Riley's golden boy rewrite a core function using JavaScript for a backend scheduler. I watched the dashboard start throwing silent errors no one knew how to interpret. They called me old school. What they didn't understand is that old school still runs the power grid. They thought they were stealing something static, that they could rip out the brain and wear the skin like a coat. But my algorithm wasn't code. It was instinct. It was nuance. It was a living, breathing machine that needed context to survive. Context that lived in my head, passed through fingers that had written and rewritten every damn line 100 times based on field reports, driver complaints, fuel logs, and data anomalies no spreadsheet would ever reveal. And now that system had been left in the hands of a man who said the word synergy like it was foreplay. So I waited. Let them dress it up. Let them ship out invites, polish the demo room, prep their keynote slide with a hero shot of Riley smirking beside next-gen route intelligence platform. I didn't protest, didn't complain, just stared out the window while my badge still worked and let the bitterness ferment into fuel. If Riley thought he was launching a product, he hadn't read the fine print. He was launching a countdown that IT started with a breach. Not in the code. Hell no, that held stronger than most bank vaults, but in trust. 7 years ago, a junior VP tried to clone my staging environment onto a tablet for a trade show in Vegas. Thought it'd be cute to run my engine live without clearance. Demo went sideways before the PowerPoint even booted. I spent the next week patching corrupt logs and explaining why our trucks rerouted through Wyoming like it was a tourist attraction. That's when I built the line. One invisible thread in a tangled web of dependencies, buried, silent, essential. Not malicious. Not even noticeable, unless you knew exactly where to look and why it was there. Most devs build kill switches out of spite. I built mine out of insurance. It wasn't even dramatic. Just a validator that pinged my private license server, tucked away in a subroutine of a subroutine, nothing flashy. If the ping failed 3 times in 72 hours, the algorithm initiated a silent deactivation sequence. All outputs froze. Simulations halted. The UI stayed glossy for exactly 16 seconds before cascading into a fatal timeout. I never thought I'd use it. Honest to God, I hoped I wouldn't. It was just protection. Like sleeping with a bat under the bed, knowing full well you'll probably never swing it. But that week, I dusted it off. Pulled the repo from cold storage. Reread the lines like they were scripture. Tight, clean, untraceable. Line 84. Validate_license. Core.license.key. https://keycheck.holden.dev/api/v3/check. Line 85. If license_status equals active, shutdown_all. No one ever questioned core.license.key because it sounded official, sounded secure. All it did was ping me my server, my rules. I hosted it off an old Raspberry Pi in my garage, powered through a UPS and buried behind a firewall thick enough to make a black hat cry. No logs. No broadcast. Just a status, active or not. And until now, it had never fired. But that Friday night, after HR sent their friendly reminder to sign over my work and Riley sent a company-wide Slack about entering a new era, I updated the validator. Not a rage update. Not some midnight-fueled tantrum. I worked slowly, deliberately, added a new token system, tied it to a timer, synced it with the product demo calendar Riley himself had shared in a mass email, CCING half of Silicon Valley like a preemptive victory lap. That was his first mistake. Timestamping my vengeance. The switch was now clean and confident. Trigger deactivation 17 seconds into any high-volume simulation request if validation token returns null. 17 seconds. Enough time for the dashboards to light up. Enough time for the room to start clapping. Enough time for the investors to see the peak before the fall. Cold precision. Not revenge. Insurance. Because it wasn't just about them stealing my code. It was about them assuming they could. That they deserved it more than the man who wrote it. That my hands were disposable, my experience optional, my architecture just another widget in a pipeline they didn't understand. They thought software was magic. They forgot the magician writes the rules. So I saved the new branch. Committed the updates under my old username, ghost_driver. No tags. No comments. Just one final entry in the changelog. // fail gracefully, when they deserve it. Then I closed the laptop, poured myself a bourbon, and watched the license server blink steady and alive in the dark. One green light. Waiting. Subject line. Final reminder. IP transfer due EOD. Timestamp. 8:07 a.m. From hr@freightrix.com. To me. Body. 4 sentences of legalese coded in passive aggression and PDF links. As previously communicated, today marks the final deadline for the voluntary transfer of your developed IP into company ownership. This ensures seamless continuity ahead of the investor demonstration. Please execute the attached form and return by 5 p.m. They even included a smiley in the signature block. Brenda. God bless her tiny clipboard soul. I didn't reply immediately. Let it sit. Let their timeline crawl toward panic while I finished my morning coffee and rewired one final dependency. This time embedding a hard token expiration tied to the server's outbound DNS fingerprint. Wouldn't stop the system from launching, just ensured it wouldn't stay launched. A little lesson in hubris. At 4:12 p.m., I responded. Subject line, final reminder. IP transfer due EOD. Attachment. Consulting_disengagement_Holden_sign.pdf. No body text. Inside the PDF, a one-page formal withdrawal of consulting and advisory services, effective immediately. Polite, professional. Surgical. No fire, no venom. Just cold closure in Calibri 12 points. I hit send and leaned back in my chair feeling nothing. Not triumph. Not spite. Just stillness. Like watching a dam break in slow motion, knowing you'd already moved to higher ground. By 5:03, my batch access was revoked. Slack logged me out with a cheery oops. Looks like you've been disconnected. VPN cut next. Git repo? Locked. Email? Gone. Like I'd never been there. A ghost. They didn't even bother with a farewell thread. No cake. No team Zoom. After 15 years, I got the digital equivalent of a head nod in a crowded hallway. I stared at the blank desktop screen for a minute, then shut the machine off for good. Out of curiosity, I pinged the deployment servers. Public endpoints only, of course. They were still live. Dashboard purring. Route streaming. calculations dancing like everything was fine. I smiled. They'd missed it. The tether. The lifeline disguised as a license validator. Heartbeat faint but essential. They thought I'd left behind a tool, not a living system. They didn't know that without regular validation, the engine would begin to starve quietly, like a body deprived of oxygen. Everything looks normal, until it doesn't. And nobody asked. Not the CTO, who now ran around quoting delivery efficiencies like he'd coded them himself. Not the engineering leads, too busy rewriting interfaces I'd hand-built with duct tape and prayer. Not the PMs who once praised my invisible stability, but now avoided eye contact in the break room. Nobody asked how it worked. Because asking meant admitting they didn't know. And not knowing meant maybe, just maybe, they needed the guy who did. Instead, they sent a form. So now the form was signed, just not the one they wanted. And the system was running, just not for long. And I was gone. Not angry. Not grieving. Just detached. Like a conductor stepping off a moving train. The tracks were theirs now. So was the crash. Riley stood in the center of the glass-walled demo room like he was hosting Shark Tank for algorithms. The lights were perfect. His shirt was so white it hurt to look at, sleeves rolled just enough to show forearms that probably hadn't lifted anything heavier than a MacBook. A few investors had flown in early to preview the revolution. The CTO had called it a dry run. But it was anything but dry. They wanted fireworks. And for 17 beautiful seconds, they got them. The simulation booted fast. The map flared to life with pulsing nodes, representing thousands of delivery trucks in real time. The test data was sanitized, curated for impact. Red zones turned green. Fuel savings climbed. Delivery times dropped. Riley paced like Jobs at Macworld, throwing phrases like AI-driven intelligence, autonomous recalibration, and next-gen fleet orchestration, like he'd grown them in his own backyard. No one questioned the numbers. They never do during rehearsal. Behind the one-way glass, interns watched the dashboard flicker and hum. One of them, a kid named Ellis, fresh out of Michigan State, squinted at the logs and leaned over to whisper something to the junior dev beside him. I think the system's pinging an external license validator? The dev didn't look up. It always does that. Legacy callback. Ignore it. Ellis frowned. It's hitting it every 90 seconds instead of the usual 72-hour interval. Weird. The dev rolled his eyes. Riley said we're in test mode. It's fine. Just cache noise. That was the moment. That exact moment where the first puff of smoke rose from beneath the stage. But no one smelled it. They were too busy clapping. Meanwhile, Brenda from HR was in a corner booth with the marketing director, finalizing the press release for Monday morning. The headline read, Freightrix unveils fully automated logistics engine. AI optimization, zero human oversight. Zero human oversight. Hell of a phrase. I read it from my phone, sitting 3 miles away at my usual cafe. Same table I always took. They knew me there. Black coffee. Reuben sandwich. No small talk. From that corner booth, I had eyes on everything. I watched the internal monitoring dashboard. They hadn't revoked my external credentials for the observability layer. Probably didn't know it existed. Most of them forgot I'd built it before we even had a DevOps team. I watched the simulation timestamp match the cache token expiration. Clock was ticking. The validators were checking more frequently now, because the demo load triggered a simulation flag Riley didn't know existed. The system, sensing elevated activity, initiated its own audit cycle. That was protocol. A protocol I wrote. 17 seconds after the final confirmation. It would all blink out. Quietly. Elegantly. They didn't know. Because they didn't ask. Back in the rehearsal room, Riley leaned into the display and said, "This is just the beginning. Next quarter, we scale globally. And once we finalize the IP consolidation, we'll be operating fully autonomous. No bottlenecks. No outdated workflows. No friction." He didn't say my name. Didn't mention the thousands of hours I'd spent tuning that algorithm through trucker complaints, GPS anomalies, weather data inconsistencies, and API outages. Didn't mention the Christmas Eve outage in 2019, I caught by hand at 3 a.m. while his predecessor was vacationing in St. Bart's. No, he said as if we had been there all along. I sipped my coffee. The screen refreshed. A green pulse lit up on my license server. That wasn't just a heartbeat. That was a countdown. They dressed the conference room like a tech cathedral. LED uplighting, sleek black walls, floor-to-ceiling displays. Enough bottled water to hydrate a small army. Everything smelled like citrus and ego. Front row. Nameplates for 3 VC firms, 2 logistics conglomerates, and 1 ex-SpaceX exec who now claimed he could smell disruption in the air. The invite-only audience was a who's who of moneyed optimism. Journalists with embargoed pens, analysts holding tablets like rosary beads, and the entire board of directors lined up like prom chaperones hoping their date wouldn't throw up. I wasn't there, of course. Physically, I mean. But I was watching. Always had been. Through a silent stream mirrored to a private relay. A leftover dev tool Riley didn't even know existed. The same observability node he'd ignored in his first architecture audit. I'd tucked it away so deep in the logs, it read like entropy if you didn't know the signature. 10:03 a.m. sharp, the CEO stepped up to the center stage. Notie un butone solar posture practiced. He held the wireless clicker like it was Excalibur, and the room leaned in before he even spoke. We're not just optimizing logistics, he began. We're redefining the way fleets move through the world. With our proprietary platform, powered entirely by in-house AI, we've eliminated inefficiency, waste, and error. This is the future of freight. The lights dimmed. The displays kicked into life. A massive US map bloomed into view, with route markers crawling like veins over a digital artery system. Icons for trucks began to animate. They moved in elegant synchrony. No lag, no stutter, just clean algorithmic ballet. The investors sat forward. Journalists tapped on their phones. Someone whispered, "Goddamn, that's smooth," under their breath. Riley took the stage next, all smiles and overconfidence. This demo uses real data, real models, and real-time simulation. No fake, just performance. And as you'll see, this engine learns, adapts, and scales instantly. No oversight. No delay. He turned to the main display and clicked Launch Simulation. And for 17 glorious seconds, the world obeyed him. Fuel savings ticked upward. Projected delivery windows narrowed to decimal point perfection. Routes shifted dynamically, optimizing live as phantom traffic data fed into the model. It looked divine. The room began to nod. Quietly. Sharply. VC number 1 raised an eyebrow, impressed. Analyst number 3 started whispering numbers to the journalist beside her. The board's CFO cracked a rare smile. And Riley? Riley looked like a man about to ask for another zero on his bonus. I watched it all from my cafe corner, earbuds in, eyes steady. This was the part they'd remember later. The part that would haunt them. That brief, shining moment when they believed they'd won. I knew the exact frame it would end on. A zoomed-in chart of optimized fuel flow over Kansas City. Smooth curve. Beautiful gradient. Peak savings line about to plateau. And then it would die. 17 seconds. It's always 17. Long enough for belief. Short enough to gut it. I leaned forward, rested my elbows on the table, and waited for the sound I'd never hear. The oxygen leaving a very expensive room. At second 18, everything died. First the dashboard twitched, just once. Barely noticeable. A slight delay in a route recalculation above Phoenix. Then a blinking truck icon near Houston froze mid-path, stuck in transit with a load of imaginary tires. A moment later, the fuel efficiency graph dipped. Not sharply, not dramatically, just off-pattern. Enough to make one intern in the back whisper, "Was that supposed to happen?" Then the screen went black. No warning. No fade-out. Just gone. For 2 long seconds, the room was silent. Then the projector screen lit up again, this time with a single-centered message. White text on a flat red background. License invalid. A collective shift rippled through the crowd. Whispered questions. Fidgeting hands. Riley stepped forward like he could somehow outrun what was happening. He tapped at the console. Nothing responded. The simulation dashboard flashed once more. Unlicensed use detected. Please contact owner for reinstatement. And just like that, the system collapsed. Every dashboard terminal in the room mirrored the same alert. The animation rigs went dark. The real-time data feed stopped streaming. The learning engine Riley had bragged about started vomiting null values, one after the next. Subsystems dropped like dominoes. Optimization maps? Blank. Fuel savings? Gone. ETA projections? Reset to default, 8 days and 13 hours. Not a single system was responding. The entire product, the demo they'd tied to a $40 million valuation, was functionally dead. Riley's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The CEO leaned forward from his seat, jaw tense. Is this part of the simulation? Riley finally spoke. No. It's a handshake error. Probably a license cache miss. Should be a quick fix, give me a second. He typed something, hands now visibly shaking. The screen responded with another message. Authentication failed. License key invalidated. He tried again. Lockout initiated. Contact creator for access restoration. Silence. Not the theatrical kind. The real kind. The kind that thickens the air and makes suits sweat through overpriced cotton. In the back row, someone cursed under their breath. One of the investors looked at her associate and whispered, "Who owns the license?" Riley stood frozen, face draining. I thought it was transferred." The CEO turned slowly, eyes like ice. "You thought?" "From my cafe booth 3 miles away. I finished my sandwich, brushed the crumbs off my shirt, and refreshed the relay. The error log was still pulsing. The validator was doing its job, cutting oxygen to every component, every subroutine, every shiny UI element they'd dressed up in buzzwords and corporate cologne. A line I wrote 7 years ago had just torn the curtain down. I took one last look at the stream. Riley now hovered over the terminal like a man staring at a locked casket, trying to yell the dead back awake. The journalists were still, pens frozen in the air. The board shifted uncomfortably. One VC had already opened his phone. I leaned back, sipped my black coffee, and smiled. The license wasn't broken. It was never theirs. Riley was sweating through his reputation. As the projector looped its humiliating red warnings, "Unlicensed use detected," he stabbed at the console keys like sheer volume might scare the system into obedience. A dry cough escaped someone in the back. No one laughed. No one moved. Only the whir of an overworked HVAC system filled the vacuum of his unraveling. He fumbled his phone out of his pocket. "Get IT in here. Now. Everyone." The CEO didn't blink. "They're watching the same thing you are, Riley." HR Brenda leaned over to whisper something to the marketing director, who was already shoving the press release into her bag like it had become radioactive. "This wasn't in the rehearsal," Brenda muttered. As if the simulation had somehow betrayed her on a spiritual level. The CTO turned to the engineers, half of whom looked like they wished they'd called in sick. "Is this a build issue? A permissions misfire?" One of the senior backend guys, Jason, spoke hesitantly. "It looks like a license callback failure." Riley snapped, "Then override it." Jason shook his head slowly. "It's not a flag. It's buried. Probably obfuscated. We'd need source-level access to even begin reversing it." "Then find it," Riley barked. "Find the call. Patch it out. This is your code." Jason swallowed. "It's not our code. It's Holden's. We never touched that layer." HR stepped in like this was her cue to distribute blame like breath mints. "Well, legal did request the IP transfer, Riley. Several times." The CTO turned to her red-faced. "You said it was a formality." "I said it was pending. You launched the damn demo without a signed asset waiver." "Oh please, you were the one who told us we could migrate without him." They both turned toward the engineering lead, who had already taken a step back. "Don't look at me," he said flatly. "You all said we didn't need oversight. Called it legacy redundancy. Said the new platform would modernize away the bottlenecks." The CEO raised a hand, quiet but final. Everything stopped. He looked at Riley with all the warmth of a guillotine. "Did you even check the license?" he asked, voice calm, low, lethal. Riley opened his mouth, but there was no lie small enough to fit. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, I stepped out of the cafe, the door's little brass bell chiming behind me. Same place I'd been every Friday for 6 years. The air was warm, clean, like a fresh page. My phone buzzed in my jacket. I didn't check it immediately. Took a breath. Let it vibrate again. When I finally looked, it wasn't a Slack ping. Not a voicemail from HR. Not a message from Brenda with a sheepish circle back request. It was from a number I recognized. One of the investors who'd sat front row at that circus. Available to consult? That was it. 5 words. 5 words that flipped the boardroom dynamic without me even being in it. Because while they panicked and pointed fingers, I'd become the one name still standing. The engineer they erased from the press release was suddenly the only one who could bring their miracle back to life. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just watched the message sit there, glowing on the screen like a flare in the dark. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel tired. I felt necessary. The boardroom looked like a murder scene. Only the bodies were reputations and the blood was made of torched credibility. Emergency session. Same room. Same suits. Very different energy. The projector was off. The investor seats were empty. Riley sat slumped in the corner like a child waiting outside the principal's office. His blazer was gone. His swagger had been smothered by silence and failure. One of the board members whispered something about fiduciary negligence. Another just stared at his tablet, reading the error logs like autopsy notes. The CEO paced slowly behind the long table. Eyes locked on the door. Brenda was nowhere in sight. They'd called me 42 minutes ago. I showed up 81 minutes late. No fanfare. No laptop. Just jeans, a black t-shirt, and a travel mug of gas station coffee. My boots echoed once across the hardwood floor before I took the seat at the far end of the table, his old seat. Riley didn't even look up. The CTO tried to speak first. We realize now there was a miscommunication regarding IP transition protocols. I raised one finger. Just one. He went quiet like someone had pulled his batteries out. The CEO stepped in, voice tight. Look, we're not interested in hashing the past. We're interested in moving forward. The system is yours. Clearly. We acknowledge that now. A woman from legal slid a folder across the table. Branded leather. Custom tabs. Printed in color. Inside, a full reinstatement offer. One-time advisory payout. Royalty clause reinstated. Licensing authority retained under me. A personal apology, typed but signed by the board. And a 6-month consulting contract at triple my original rate, backdated to Friday. I read it slowly, letting the silence thicken around every flipped page. Riley tried to speak again. I didn't look at him. I looked straight at the CEO and said, "Calm as a loaded gun. The license isn't broken. You just don't own it." He nodded once, grim. Resigned. The kind of nod men give right before signing the check that saves their job and sells their soul. I stood up, folded the contract, and tucked it into my back pocket. System will be online by morning, I said. Assuming no one tries to touch the back end. Understood, the CEO said, like a man who'd been burned and now feared the match. I turned to leave. Riley opened his mouth to apologize or beg. I'm not sure which. But I didn't give him the space to finish. Just walked out the same way I walked in. Quiet, unreadable, inevitable. Down in the lobby, I finally took out my phone. The investor had texted again. Still available to consult? I replied with 2 words. Always was. As the elevator doors closed behind me, I could see my reflection. Calm, steady, no emotion. Because they had tried to delete me. But the system remembered. And in the end? You fired the engineer. The system fired back.